Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Depending on the time of the day that you're watching this would determine that. My name is Kelly Steinke, and I'd like to welcome you to Success with Executive Functioning Skills. I'm excited to be here with you today. A real brief background on myself. I am the founder of Reed Learning Educational Services, which is an educational service company based out of Appleton, Wisconsin, where we provide one-on-one services for students who really struggle with reading and spelling due to dyslexia. We work with kids online and in person. I'm also the author and creator of Silver Moon Spelling Rules, which is a specialized supplemental curriculum for students who struggle with spelling or don't struggle with spelling. All good information in that program. And as well as I also serve currently as the president of our IDA Wisconsin branch. So I'm super excited to be here with you today because executive functioning skills is a topic that just isn't talked about enough. It kind of is one of those topics that really flies under the radar. So I'm just going to go right into our presentation here, and at the end of this presentation, I'll make note that I do have some handouts. If we were in person, I'd normally have a handout packet for you. So you can look for that handout packet within this conference platform right on the website. So executive functioning skills can be quite elusive, as I said before, because you really can't see them unless you know what you're looking for. And in order to make executive functioning skills less elusive, we need to shed some light on them. So we need to make them visible, tangible, concrete, so they can be tapped into, strengthened, supported, and first of all, noticed and recognized. So I'm going to state a well-known fact here. We all have brains, right? We wouldn't be alive without our brains, and all of our brains are unique. We're all born with different capabilities, different strengths, different weaknesses. This is a great thing because this means that everyone at some point in their life is going to struggle with certain executive functioning skills, and that's perfectly normal. Perfectly normal to have difficulties from time to time, or slight difficulties overall with general areas of executive functioning. But some people will struggle with executive functionings to a degree that it's actually a diagnosable condition. And this is called executive functioning deficit or executive functioning disorder. And this is something that can be diagnosed by a neuropsychologist. And there's a lot of overlap between this type of deficit and some of the characteristics you'll see with someone who has ADD, which would be attention deficit disorder. Executive functioning skills deficit and ADD have a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities, and some differences. They are different, but it's good to know that there is definitely some overlap there. So I'd like to share with you a real life example of a student that I had at one time. This is not her, but the story I'm going to share with you is very much from real life, from when I was teaching in the classroom. So it's ELA class, English Language Arts, and my student's name is Mandy, which is the name I'll give her for the case of this presentation. And Mandy can't seem to get a grip on homework and expectations. In fact, on more than one occasion, she spent hours upon hours completing entire papers, entire projects, turns them in at the nick of time, only to be told the next day she didn't follow directions. And in order to get a score on her paper or her project, she's going to need to redo everything correctly, this time following the directions, and try again, essentially. Well, you repeat this event 2-3 times in a semester, and this is a middle school student, and Mandy's going to start to burn out, which is exactly what happened. She started to burn out, and she started to really hate writing. And if this isn't bad enough, she begins to just experience this overall fatigue with education, with academics, reduced motivation for school. She starts to experience some anxiety, going to ELA class, and there's some tears shed, and she decides she's no good at writing. She's not a good writer. She doesn't like writing anymore. Well, Mandy's constantly redoing assignments or getting really poor scores. So, who could blame her? But what Mandy doesn't realize is that her writing is actually exceptional. She's probably the top of the class, but her scores just aren't reflecting it. If only she could dial it in so that she could show her writing skills while also meeting the goals of the assignment. So here's a question for reflection. Think about this for a minute. Does Mandy have a problem with written expression? No, and if we were in person, I'd hopefully see your head shaking no. She doesn't have a problem with written expression at all. She has a problem with executive functions, with deciphering complicated, multi-step directions, often, sadly to say, poorly written directions or too briefly written directions. And she really has a hard time visualizing the finished product. So what's the expectation in the end? What is the assignment supposed to look like when she's done with it? So Mandy doesn't need help with writing, though she's failing ELA class. She needs help with executive functioning skills. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. So we have 5 goals for our presentation today. Goal number 1 being, what are executive functioning skills? Why are they important to teach and develop? Secondly, we'll talk just briefly about brain development as it relates to executive functions. Thirdly, we will go through all of the executive functions that we have. There are 11 of them. Fourthly, I'll go through 10 ready-to-use strategies that you can use right at home or in the classroom immediately after this presentation. And fifthly, we'll talk about 4 truths about time. So executive functions can affect every area of our lives. And it's important to note, it doesn't stop at academics, though we're here, most of us are teachers or psychologists. There's usually some doctors in the audience too, and we're really concerned about helping students develop and grow in their academics. But executive functions also, bleed into home life and social life, and weak executive functions can really wreak havoc on someone's life. So because of this, I'm hopeful that you leave today with more understanding about executive functions, including what they are, how to teach them, how to support them, and how to understand where our students might have some limitations due to maturation, brain development. So we'll start with the basics here. What are executive functions? Executive functions are the mental processes that we use to complete daily tasks, short-term and long-term goals. And these processes give us the mental control and self-regulation it takes to complete tasks. Your executive functioning center of your brain is primarily located in your prefrontal cortex, primarily, which is the area of the brain right behind your forehead. And it's considered kind of the CEO of the brain, the chief executive officer. If you're in the music field, you're a musician, you might consider the executive functioning center the orchestra conductor. So 2 good ways to look at that. All right, so here are our all 11 executive functioning skills. And they do kind of pop in and out throughout the brain, but like I said, in the research, the majority of our executive functions are hubbed right there in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So what I'm going to do is just briefly go through what each one of these are. Because being successful in our complicated world, both in school and in the workplace and home place and socially, it requires a lot of different skills that go unseen and often untaught. unless you actually have some training and are teaching explicitly what some of these executive functioning skills are. And at this point, this is where I would refer you to the handouts so that you can reference some of this information. But we'll start with number one. So number one is metacognition. And if you're taking notes, metacognition is really just having good self-awareness. So I'd say self-awareness and problem solving. It's the ability to think about your thinking. So it's a little voice in your head that keeps you on track, keeps you on target, kind of that conscience saying, are we doing the right thing? Should I be doing this right now? How did that go? Did that go okay? What was their reaction to what I said? So if you're metacognitive, it's a good thing in all areas in life. It's almost as if you're looking at yourself from above and you're asking yourself, what am I doing and why am I acting the way I'm acting? And is it a fit for this social setting? Yeah, I've heard some people refer to metacognition as if you're looking at a mirror within a mirror, which is kind of an abstract concept, but it's that voice in your head that directs your actions. Second, goal-directed persistence. Goal-directed persistence is simply finishing projects. So when you start something, do you finish it out? Or do you walk away and leave it undone? Maybe never come back to it, or maybe come back to it so seldom that it sits for a year or 2 years on a table. Hopefully our students don't have that type of an issue, but I know as executive functions unchecked as adults, it can turn into a situation like that. Flexibility. Executive functioning skills include flexibility. So this would include just going with the flow. When things don't go as planned, are you able to deal? Are you able to manage? So we're not referring to stretching and yoga here. We're referring to mental flexibility. Can you adapt? A lot of these skills can be hard for students, but all of them are very much things that we can work on and grow and develop. Fourthly, sustained attention is part of executive functions. Sustained attention is really just the ability to focus on a task at hand for a long period of time, or enough time that it takes to get the project done. And we're not talking like hyper focus. Some of our students and some adults can really hyper focus on something. A good example of that would be video games. Oftentimes, kids can get into a real time warp, time vortex. They're playing those video games. They just keep playing and playing and playing, and they poof, don't even realize 3 hours have passed. That would be sustained attention to the extreme. But sustained attention meaning just focusing on tasks long enough to get them done. Fifthly, response inhibition. That's simply self-control. Do you have enough energy in you, mental energy in you, to control impulsive behavior and try kind of stave off some of the impulsivity that our students can get throughout the school day, or at home, or socially. So both verbally and in actions. A big part of response inhibition is, is our fuel tank full? If we start our day with a full tank of fuel, like if you imagine your energy as a fuel tank, and your energy when you wake up in the morning should be full because you got a good night's sleep, you had a nice protein-based breakfast, and throughout your day, what happens to your fuel tank? It gets lower and lower and lower and lower, but we don't want it to get too low, because when we start to get kind of mentally fatigued, that's when some of our response inhibitions go right out the window. And so that's something that we can try to stave off and remedy by, making sure that we stay hydrated throughout the day, making sure we, have enough food in us, enough nutritious food too, proteins to keep us alert and with it. So, we don't want students getting hangry. That creates a whole lot of impulsivity if we get over hungry. So sleep and food and just diet and routine is real important with that one, with a lot of these actually. But number six executive functioning skill is working memory. And working memory is really just your conscious thinking. It's being able to hold on to information while you're working on it. So it's as if I like to think of working memory as a plate of food. So if I have a plate and I have all the pieces that I'm working on for a math problem on that plate, maybe 2 times 3 and 4 plus 5 and carry a 1, all the different pieces you have to do mentally when you're doing mental math. That working memory is everything that can stay on the plate while you're working. Working memory can get overloaded, and as things start falling off the plates, that's when we have to start bringing in helpers, like maybe taking notes or writing yourself a Post-it or using a calculator. So that is working memory. Another executive function is planning and prioritization. So do you have the ability to connect to the future? Can you think about what you have to do now, here in this time and space, and connect that to what's going to be due in the future, maybe later on today or tomorrow or next week? And then can you take that, and maybe you have 5 different things that are due, and can you prioritize which one has to be done first, second, third, fourth, and so on and so forth to keep yourself on track? 8th, we've got time management. And time management really is what it is, what it says. It's being able to manage your time. So are you conscious of time? Are you really aware of time passing? If you say, I'll be ready in 5 minutes, are you pretty tuned in metacognitively to those 5 minutes, and you're checking your time and you're out the door in 5 minutes? Or does time just kind of slip away, and 45 minutes later you go, oh my gosh, where did time go? That tends to happen to me quite often. That's an area I always have to work on, is time management. So another big part of time management for students in particular is, how are you using your time? Are you working when you could be playing, or vice versa? Are you playing when you should be working? So it's really, having a structure and a construct to your time, and knowing what you should be doing with your time and using it appropriately. Number 9 is organization. And organization really refers to material items. So folders, paper management, books, backpack, desk, bedroom. But it can also refer to organization of thoughts. Are our thoughts organized and logical and sequenced? Or do they feel like they're just sprayed all over the place, kind of like the fire hose analogy? Oftentimes I've heard people express when they struggle with characteristics of like ADD or even executive function deficits. They say, it's as if someone has a huge fire hose and they're just spraying out that water on me. And, what happens to most of that water? It's not going to soak in because it's just too much. It's going to spray off in all directions, and so that overwhelm of just too much coming in, too much going on at once, overstimulation can really affect our ability to organize our materials and belongings and thoughts within our mind. Task initiation is our 10th executive function, and this really refers to getting started on things. You know, are you or whoever you're taking this training for, are they someone who can just know they have to get started on something, sit down and boom, they're off and running? Or is there some procrastination? You know, oftentimes when we get executive function deficits or ADD or, you know, other areas of struggle, learning disabilities, there can be some procrastination. And that's kind of the elephant in the room usually, because it's not fun to do what's not fun. But what often, you know, people don't realize is that if we can do what we have to do, even though it's not fun, in the end, we're going to have more control of our time. You know, we're going to have more ability to do things with our time because we won't be scrambling to catch up because we wasted our time. Our 11th executive function is controlling emotions, emotional stability. And our emotions are centered in our prefrontal cortex, but you know, they are all over the brain, in the amygdala and elsewhere as well. And this is really interesting because when executive functions are an issue, oftentimes it leads to trouble with controlling emotions. And in fact, like depression, anxiety, anger, all of these negative emotions and negative feelings can really override some of these other executive functions. So it's, you know, it's really important if you really think that someone you love or care for has got a significant issue with some of these executive functioning skills, like to the point to where you're looking for some help, it's really important to talk to someone who's really knowledgeable so you can kind of tease out what exactly is going on, because you don't want to overlook anxiety, potentially an anxiety disorder or depression or some sort of underlying, you know, mental health issue that could be affecting some of these other skills. What's interesting about the emotional process in our brain, and you know, I used to do trainings way back when on love and logic, so you know, behavior within the classroom, and you know, as if you can picture a bell curve, I should have put this in a slide, but I didn't. So a traditional bell curve where you have kind of your flat plateau and then you come up and rise, and then the bell curve kind of comes down on the backside. You know, as your emotional response to something goes up, so you start to get upset, maybe harried, frustrated, start to get anxious. Your ability to reason and use logic goes down. So there's an inverse relationship to emotions going up and logic going down. So what's happening there is our brain is flipping to a different mode. You know, our ability to reason and use logic is primarily centered in that prefrontal cortex. That's where we get our thinking and critical thinking skills and good logic and reasoning. And when you start to see students or people in general really in that fight or flight mental state where they're yelling or screaming or like I say, a toddler is throwing a fit, they're not functioning in that prefrontal cortex. They are functioning in their brainstem. You know, and the brainstem literally is where we have that fight or flight reaction. And the only way to get a person out of that brainstem mode and back into critical thinking and logical reasoning mode is to bring them back to a calm place so that they can think clearly. All super interesting stuff. Okay, so if you're looking for an interesting book on executive functions in the brain, John Medina is the author of Brain Rules, and he's also authored Brain Rules for Babies. But he is quoted as saying executive function is actually a better predictor of academic success than IQ. This is huge. A question to ask might be, Can you experience success in life, in academics, without having good executive functioning skills in place? Possibly, but possibly not, depending on how significant the delays are. Maybe a better question to ask might be, will you achieve better success with good executive functioning skills in place? That's a more positive way to put it. And the answer to this would be a resounding yes. The better our executive functioning skills are, the more we can show our intelligence and help people and be a part of the community and relate to people. Okay, so this is kind of, a lot of parents and teachers, end up feeling this way about some of their students. They're going, they're really struggling and I don't know what to do. They're smart, but they're not showing it. They did their homework, but it didn't make it to school. It never got turned in. I looked in their backpack and I can't find it. It's nowhere. So a lot of us, and the kids included who struggle with this stuff, they're pulling their hair out. Some of you know kids like this in your lives or in your classrooms. I know I do for sure. Okay, so why are students struggling? Some students struggle because of learning disabilities or some other sort of issue they're dealing with, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed. Some kids are struggling with executive function deficits, which is the topic for today's discussion. You get a double whammy if they're struggling with both. That really does complicate things when you start layering some of these difficulties. The kids with learning disabilities or some other issue they're struggling with, they might be identified or stereotyped as slow, not very smart, not very bright. That's the stereotype. You and I know that's not accurate. It's, a lot of students with dyslexia in particular, they need specialized instruction. They need a way that works for them to learn, to read, to spell, to write, and to show their knowledge. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. That happens in schools. Kids with executive function deficits, they're usually stereotyped as lazy. They're the kids who don't turn any homework in. They always lose their homework, or they have their homework, but it's a crumpled mess. The desk is an absolute disaster. Bedroom's a disaster. You ask them questions, they go, I don't know. No idea. They might seem like half asleep or out of it half the time. These are all red flags that there is something going on, because I guarantee you, our kids don't enter kindergarten when they first start their school career and think to themselves, boy, I'm really going to do lousy in school and I'm so excited for it. I don't want to turn in my papers on time, and I definitely don't want to do well in ELA class. It's not going to happen. Humans, we are wired to want to do well, to want to achieve, to want to please people. So, there's this gap between kindergarten or pre-K and when kids really start to show struggles, whether it's earlier, second, third grade, or later, 6th, 7th, 8th, or beyond, we really have to think about what is the reason for these struggles? What is the cry for help here? Kids with executive function deficits, it's usually not identified because it's really not on a lot of our radars. It's unfortunately usually just stereotyped as a character issue. So let's circle back to good old Mandy here. The scenario I described earlier was really best case scenario. Let's say Mandy's issues are complicated because not only does she misunderstand directions, but she's also a bad writer. right? She's just not good at writing. She doesn't get it. She doesn't organize her thoughts. She doesn't write with a clear message. It's just difficult to even put together a paragraph. That would really complicate things. Because when you have both issues with a learning disability and issues with executive function deficits, and they can exasperate one another, right? Because then you get some anxiety in there and some frustration and other issues that are going on. There's going to be a real struggle. Is that how do we support our students in this situation? We're getting there. I'm going to give you some tools in just a moment here. Last year at our state conference, we had some presenters, and this was one of their slides. And I sourced this from our IDA Wisconsin State Conference of 2020, and I couldn't locate right offhand the name, like the source that this came from, but I do want you to know that this was pulled from last year's conference from a different presenter. And this is about dysgraphia, which is your writing disability. And we're not here to talk about writing disabilities today, but I thought this was really just really insightful to look at, because cognitive overload is a real thing. We have a certain amount of cognitive resources to dedicate to our tasks at hand, to dedicate to what we're working on. Think of our schools, our kids in school trying to use working memory and stay focused and control their responses to things. And meanwhile, they're feeling hungry and lunch is still an hour away. And they've got all these other things going on. And without supports and often some remediation in the case of a learning disability, our students, they're not going to be successful, and they're always going to feel as though their performance doesn't match with their intelligence. So, have you ever had the experience of talking with a student who's really clearly very bright, good vocabulary, they're insightful, they're reflective, maybe they're even gifted in sports or the arts, but then you look at them on paper, their grades and their assignments, and it doesn't match up? These are the kids we're talking about here. And if you take a look at this slide, you can see, we're each given, all of our brains are different. We all have a brain, remember, but all of our brains are different, and we're all given a certain amount of cognitive resources to use throughout our day. And depending on how much energy has to go towards some of these executive functioning skills, determines how much mental energy we have to devote to other topical academic things, content. And so this was very insightful when I saw this last year. I thought very, very good visual. You'll notice, the one on the bottom, the kids with a learning disability have, very little devoted to content, whereas the kids without the learning disability have a lot of mental energy to devote to content. So there's only so much to go around, and depending on what we're working through will determine how much energy we have to devote. So there are lots of different executive functioning skills needed for schoolwork throughout the day, for homework at home, and even in social situations. I've gone through and just kind of listed a few things here that kids will need to do throughout their day at school, and then listed the executive functions necessary for those. If we had more time and we were in person, I usually would do small groups and have you work through A through H and look at your list of executive functions and try to determine which functions match with which skill. But this is also on your handout, and you're welcome to reference that, at a later point. But as you can see, a lot of these skills, all of these skills are being used throughout the day for students. Oops, I'm going to flip right back here. So at this point, you have been talking a lot. Just take a minute to reflect. If you're in person, once again, I would have you, do like a share out with a partner. You'd take a minute to share what you've learned. And then goal number one, would be answering, why are executive functioning skills important to teach and develop? I'll give you just a couple seconds to think about that. I've heard the argument that teachers don't have time to fit more into their curriculum in terms of executive functions. And I'd argue that you don't not have the time to teach executive functioning skills, especially when all of these things can be taught, really concurrently with what you're already teaching. A lot of it can be very authentically presented. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit of brain stuff here. The way the brain is wired and how it matures really impacts behavior and learning. I want you to picture a toddler. They're in a store. We'll say it's a hardware store with their dad. And at the counter, of course, they have all the goodies. They've got the suckers and, candy bars and mints and gum. And the toddler sees all these goodies and they want the gum. They say, Dad, can I get some gum? And Dad says, nope, we're not buying any gum. The toddler tugs on Dad's shirt again. He asks again, Dad, can I get some gum? And Dad says, nope, son, not today. We're not getting any gum. And you do this long enough and the toddler starts to cry and starts to beg. And if it gets bad enough, they're on the ground kicking and screaming, right? This is the toddler functioning in brainstem mode. That's that fight or flight reaction. And this makes a whole lot of sense when we talk about brain developments, because our brains develop from the bottom up. So right here in the brainstem, when we're born, is what we have, primarily develops, and then they develop from the inside out. So if you were to take your two hands and fists and put them together like this, and if you were to cut your hands in half, this is kind of like your right hemisphere and left hemisphere. Here's your brainstem. As your brain develops from young on, it's developing first down here in the brainstem, which is your BS mode, right? Fight or flight, literally BS, brainstem, not the other BS, but that would be a good correlation. You're developed here. And then as you get older, your brain continues to develop up into the middle and then out to the sides. And, if you think about where your prefrontal cortex is located, it is the furthest possible away from where we first start developing. So it is, at the very top and on the very outside of the brain. And this is why scientists are saying that our brains are not fully matured and fully developed prefrontally and in that cortex until almost 28 years old. That's takes quite some time to develop. So, as a toddler kicking and screaming, all kids have those moments at some time in their life. It makes a lot of sense that they're reacting that way because they literally and physically do not have the capacity to reason and logic using their prefrontal cortex like we do as adults because it's not developed. And this is so important to keep in mind with our students in school, especially our students with executive function deficits. We can coach and guide and train kids in how to use all of these executive functioning skills and be mature and logical and use critical thinking, but to a certain degree, depending on their age and developments, they may not have certain capabilities that us as adults assume they have. I'm going to play a little video clip here for you. Give me a moment to pop this open.
Well, there is no obvious.
I'm just going to rewind this. Okay, here we go.
I mean, they're physically. when we look at kids these days, especially these days, I mean, we'll go into a high school campus and some of these kids look more mature than we do. Is that fair to say that? I mean, they're physically, their stature is much bigger. And the way that they speak, we think, you know, this is a grown-up. In every way, in every sense, this is a grown-up. But what we're realizing more and more is that they're not. So I want to give you a very practical example before we even get started talking about the brain as to how they're different. There was a study done that looked at how teenagers versus adults interpreted facial expression. So in this study, both a group of teenagers and adults were given a series of pictures. And this is a sample of the picture that they were given. And they were asked to describe the emotion that was experienced by the person in the photo. And so these options were, are they shocked, afraid, angry? What do you think the person was experiencing? So when they did this study with teenagers, what they found out is first, not only did they ask them the question, but they also did MRI imaging to look at what part of the brain was stimulated when the teenager and the adult were thinking about it. And if you notice, this is the teen brain and this is the adult brain. Now don't look at size because it's not, you know, the brain does not grow that much when they become an adult versus a teenager, but look at where the primary activity was in these two populations. See the teen brain? See where the activity primarily occurred when asked this question? In the adult brain, do you see where the activity occurred? Is it okay in the back or is it too, you can see it okay? So what they noticed was that in the teenage brain, the lower brain was activated more. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but there was a drastic difference. Now, when they also looked at kind of the answers, what they found out was that in 100% of the adults, they got the emotions correct in the pictures. So when they were shown the different facial expressions of the people in the pictures, the adults were 100% accurate. In the teenagers, their accuracy was no better than 50%. Okay, now y'all are all nodding like, yeah, I know, I totally know what that means. But I mean, we really kind of need to take a step back and think about that. In 50% of the cases, when a teenager was looking at the facial expressions of somebody, they misinterpreted those expressions. Okay, so a very tangible example of how the teenager's brain functions very differently than the adult brain. So
Okay, I'm gonna turn my video back on. Great example of how, you know, our brain development is development. You know, it is developing as we mature through life and grow in age. So if you'd like the link to that, well, it's in this presentation. I'll send this out as well. But you know, if you can't find it, just let me know. It's a fascinating presentation about the teen brain versus the adult brain. Okay, I think we're back on track here. So a couple brain basics. And, you know, I should say the reason I'm going through some of this brain stuff is really because when you're working with students or your own children on some of these executive functioning skills, you have to establish buy-in. You know, you have to set the groundwork and get them to realize there is some importance to what you're working on with them. You can throw all these, you know, tools at them and timers and day planners and everything else, but you know, if they're old enough, typically when I work with kids in executive functions, they're in 5th grade or older, and most of them I would say are middle school and high school and college level, even some adults. But you know, unless you give them some of this background, you're not going to get the buy-in that you need for them to get hooked, to want to learn more and to want to use some of these strategies to experiment with them a little bit. And we're going to get to these strategies next. But keep in mind, the adult brain, not fully developed till 25 to 30 years old. Adolescent brain is different. Executive function skills, they're dependent on genetics. They're very much hereditary, and your age. Okay, we all have different material to work with when we're born. Neuroplasticity. We don't have a finite set of intelligence as once believed. We are able to grow, you know, in areas of learning that we find interesting. Dyslexia is a great example of that. If you're not wired to learn to read using traditional reading methods, you can learn to read using a science of reading method, using a structured literacy based approach, and those new neural networks will form within your brain, and you will start to normalize how you're reading. You do improve because of neuroplasticity. Fourthly, brain health is really important. We just don't have the time to get into that today. This is such a brief presentation, but I have offered professional development courses on this topic before, and we will delve into sleep. Sleep is huge. A lot of teenagers think, I don't need sleep. I can survive on 4 hours a night, 3 hours a night. They might be able to function day to day doing that for a certain amount of time, but there are detrimental effects to not having enough sleep. And it has to do with, and this is going to get kind of off on a side topic, but when we sleep, we have these glial cells within our brain, and they're almost like, I've heard them described like little vacuum cleaners, and they zoom around our brain, and they basically are in charge of cleaning up toxic levels of stress hormones. And if we don't get enough sleep, then these glial cells can't do their job, right? So then we wake up in the morning and we still have all of these toxic, levels of stress within our brain. And furthermore, when we sleep, it's time for our mind to take what we experienced, our memories from the day, and catalog and organize them as we're sleeping. So sleep is a big deal. It keeps your brain healthy, keeps your mind healthy, keeps your body healthy. Having a healthy diet and exercise, and just breathing, as simple as it might sound, but breathing through your nose and deep breathing when you start to feel yourself get really stressed. Deep breath signals the brain to calm the body. Hyperventilated breath often signals the brain to panic, to go into that fight or flight mode. There's a good book that's on my must-read book list. I haven't read it yet, but I've listened to the podcast by one of the authors, and it's called Breathe. And it's all about the science of breathing and how to improve health through breathing. It's interesting stuff. Fifthly here, brain development and our emotional experiences with learning, it affects emotions. So, left unchecked, just keep an eye out for anxiety issues and depression issues and emotional stuff that might need a trained therapist to help with. Okay, we're finally at the tools. I think this presentation may go a little more than an hour, but we're online, so that's okay. Anytime you see one of these tools in the corner of your screen on the slides following this slide, you're going to know I'm giving you a strategy or something you can use real time with students or children to help support executive functioning skills. Tool number one, we need to identify needs. And in doing so, you're establishing credibility and you're establishing some buy-in. So when you're working with students, my recommendation is to go through each of these concepts, not as dryly as I did in this presentation, you're all adults, but go through each of these concepts, and I would take some time telling stories about each of the 11, just so they can picture it in their mind, picture what each of these are, give examples, and have them doodle some pictures, just as a memory trigger to help them connect which one of these skills with what it means and what you discussed in your stories. So first, you're identifying what all of these skills are with your students. You're telling stories, you're doodling pictures about them. I keep saying doodling because a lot of times our students aren't responding to bullet pointed lists. You know, some of us are list makers. We're driven by words. We see words and lists of words in our mind when we have to get things done. Whereas others of us are very much more visual and they think in pictures. A lot of our kids with executive functioning needs think in picture. So run with it. Use the pictures if that's their primary default. What you want to do is essentially, I like to have kids self-rate their ability to use each of these skills. So you've explained all the skills. Well, now let's talk about number one. What do you think? If you had to rate yourself on a level of 1 through 10 or 1 through 5, 10 being high, 1 being, I don't have this at all. I'm never metacognitive, never thinking in my head, you know, what would you be? You know, you can have parents and teachers self-rate also. It's just kind of a fun survey to do. And you just know you're not going to fix everything. And you probably won't make anything perfect either. But once you can identify some needs and have some buy-in with what these needs are, there's always ways to make improvements. There's always things we can do and teach and use to support. Okay. So let's say you've got a student and you've explained everything and you've self-rated, and now you're looking at your student or group of kids and you're going, all right, did any of your ratings fall below an 8? Maybe some kids are raising their hand. Maybe you're not doing this publicly. Maybe it's more of a one-on-one thing and you're noticing some 5s, some 3s, maybe a 1 here and there. You know, what's going to happen when you don't have the tools necessary to survive school and home responsibilities? Because these are the tools, really. This is your toolbox that you need to survive the day-to-day. You might be brilliant, you could be a genius, very intelligent, but if you don't have some of these or all of these executive functioning skills working as they should, it's going to be rough. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. If you don't have some of these skills, there is going to be a connection between learning and behavior. And notice you've got another tool in the upper corner of your screen here, because this is a process I recommend teaching to students. This came right out of the Seeing My Time curriculum by Mary D. Sklar. She is an expert in executive functioning skills and teaching it. And in her research and studying psychology, we've learned that the first step to having trouble is feeling a little confused. Okay, the second step is a little bit of helplessness. Like you're not real sure what to do. Now you're confused, but you also don't know how to get help. The third step, after you're feeling helpless, if you let that go long enough without asking for help, you start to feel a little hopeless, like, oh, I can't get this. This isn't for me. I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough, or no one wants to help me, or my teacher won't explain it, or they don't have time for me. And that's just not a good place to be, because once you've gone through the confusion, the helplessness, the hopelessness, oftentimes what we see is kids start to act out with behaviors. And those behaviors manifest in one of 3 ways, or all of 3 ways. They escape, they avoid, right? Don't do their homework, they're truant to school, they skip out, they're late, they get sick, there's the semi-somatic behaviors. They're in the bathroom always with a stomach ache. Okay, they get angry, right? A lot of our students with diagnoses in EBD, emotional behavioral disorders, really and truly, it's because they have academic problems. They're acting out. And thirdly, they might go into some depression and experience some anxiety. And left long enough, this can turn into very serious issues. So this tool is showing your students this cycle. Teach it directly. This is nothing to hide from them, nothing to be ashamed of. This takes the blame off the students. Really and truly it does. And it explains to them that this is what we as human beings go through when we experience trouble learning if we don't ask for help. I think you probably saw the little help arrow flipping around here. There we go. I wish it could just like flash or something, but so the key is once you start to feel so confused, the next step, you've got to get rid of the helplessness, get rid of the hopelessness, get rid of the acting out, and you have to ask for help. And that is such a hard thing for some of our students to do. They don't want to ask for help, but when they ask for help, that's how learning occurs, and you avoid all of these other negative consequences. This can be very empowering for students, especially for some of our older students, our high school level students who have a history of really having some problems with homework completion and stuff. When they can see this progression of behaviors and know that there's a reason for what's happening, they can start to correct some of these behaviors. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is teaching students how to ask for help. I do feel this should be taught directly. Students should be taught to advocate for themselves and ask for help. A few things involved with this. They first off have to be aware enough of their self. They have to have some metacognition in order to know that they need help. Okay. Sometimes as teachers and parents, we've all seen it. We've seen kids just sit there trying to figure something out. And it's like, well, why don't they just ask for help? And it's almost as if they just have not made that connection that, yeah, I'm stuck. Yeah, I should ask for help. So teaching this directly is a good thing. They need to be honest with themselves when they're stuck. They can't deny, it's like trying to drive somewhere and getting lost and not asking for directions or popping it in Waze or your Google Maps. You got to really be honest when you're lost so you can get to where you're going, just like you have to be honest with when you are confused and don't understand homework and ask for some help. And all of this takes courage. It takes courage to ask for help. And oftentimes kids they don't want to ask. So I encourage kids to say, I'm feeling confused. Can you show me how to do this instead of telling me? If we can give our students a visual image, a picture or hard example of what they need to do or complete, instead of just all auditory all the time, it will really help them. So you can actually role play this. It takes some confidence sometimes for kids to just get up the courage to even go to their teacher. And then once they get there, what do they say? Well, here's what they can say. I'm feeling confused. Can you show me instead of telling me? Good self-advocacy. Okay, I've been talking a long time. It's already been an hour. I can't even believe that. So take a minute to reflect, a minute to share. Again, if we were in person, we would share out with each other. And we just answered goal number 2. So what's the connection between brain development and executive functioning skills? Okay. Metacognition. In order to develop metacognition, you're going to have to explicitly teach students to think in their head, pause before speaking or reacting, and then respond. And I actually, in one of my teaching positions many years ago, I was running a magnet program for students with autism, high functioning autism. And this metacognitive piece was so huge to help with the impulsivity. And it's part of executive functions. Of course, it's all kind of related. So, think, pause, respond. Okay, another tool. Time can be a very abstract concept for many people, especially for developing children and teens, because time is not visible. I can't take time, out of my briefcase and put it in a box and pack it up and ship it to you. Time cannot be seen, it cannot be held, it's not tangible unless you make it visible. In order for time to be made concrete, we need some tools. One such tool, I'm going to flip back here. One such tool would be an analog clock as opposed to a digital clock. If you think about this, a digital clock, say I've got an Apple Watch, and I know Apple Watches, I don't have one, but you can put analog on there. You can also put digital on there, I believe. But your digital clock is telling you time right now, right in this moment. But your analog clock, the old school clock that you see on the screen here, it gives you a concept of time, because you not only see what time it is now, but you can picture time in the future and you can picture time past. So you're more able to see the passage of time with your analog clock. And there's lots of things you can do with these clocks in the classroom and at home in terms of dry erase markers, and just working with the clock, drawing time limits on your clock in order to help it work for you, for your situation. Okay, so is time on your side? Maybe it is if you're good at time management, but maybe it's not. Time cannot stretch. A lot of people, me included, I really wish time could stretch. Can't I just take the 5 minutes I need before I walk out the door and just stretch it out a little bit? Can I get 20 minutes out of it? No, I can't. Although I think I can sometimes, I really can't. It's finite, and the 5 minutes will come up whether I want it to or not. All right. Secondly, time is invisible unless you make it visible, unless you have a way to keep track of your time. Time does get away from us unless it's planned. If you don't plan your day, you could probably very easily spend the day not doing a whole lot, just kind of putzing around. And at the end of the day, you go, wow, where did the day go? Fourthly, priorities must be kept in our field of vision. And we're going to talk about that next. So if you have priorities you have to get done, things you have to do in order to meet deadlines, you must keep them in plain sight throughout the day as a reminder to keep you on track. And you have to use metacognition to self-check our use of time. This was a little audio clip I had here. Here, we'll see if you recognize the audience or the artist. Okay, I just couldn't resist, right? Rolling Stones, time is on your side. We're talking about time. So I had to throw that in there. I don't know. The rest of the lyrics is, does Mick Jagger think time is on his side for real? I'm not sure. Email me an answer to that. All right. So tools for time management and self-monitoring. You got another tool in the corner here. Lots of different tools you can use. The trick to using these tools is to really teach kids the background, the why, why is this necessary? How can it help us? and practice using these things, because if you just throw kids a bunch of tools, it's not going to work unless you really teach to those tools. Analog clock, I already talked about. Digital timer, actually, you can see mine right behind me. They come in large sizes and very small sizes. And what's nice about those is they show elapsed time. So if I want someone to work on a project for 30 minutes, but no longer, I can set my red part of the timer to the 30. There's a little button you can dial down, and it will just elapse as you get closer to the 30-minute mark being done. And then it will beep, when the time limit is up. Using digital alerts and reminders. Let's say you've got a child at home doing homework and you say, you know what, you've got to spend 20 minutes reading, but after 20 minutes, you can go play your video game or you can go play outside. Well, it's really helpful just to set a timer on your stove or a timer on Alexa or your phone to alert them to when they're done, or alert them that they need to get up and maybe do something else, walk the dog or feed the dog or whatever it might be. So auditory and visual supports are really important with people who are time management, who have time management struggles. A cube timer is another kind of neat tool. I have one of those here too. It's a little timer. There's a button on the bottom. You can flip it on and off, and depending on where you lay it on the table, so if I lay it with the 15 up, it will time me for 15 minutes. If I just want to give a student a quick 1 minute break, I might lay it on the 1, and it will beep when the minute break is done. Another kind of an experiment I like to do with kids, and email me if you'd like this document, because I do have a nice PDF of this, is analyzing your time. So what I do is I have kids pick a chore or activity, and I give them this piece of paper that you see in the bottom right corner, and they'll pick like 3 or 4 things. So maybe one is playing video games. That's always a popular one, oftentimes with boys. Maybe 2 is unloading the dishwasher. 3 is getting ready for bed at nighttime, and 4 might be I don't know, feeding the dogs. They're going to list those things, and then they're going to really think about how long they think it takes them to do those activities. So let's take the first one. Was it unloading the dishwasher? That was probably the second one I just said. When I did this, I'll be honest, I put down 10 minutes. I thought it takes me about 10 minutes to unload the dishwasher. Dishwasher is one of my least favorite jobs. So I thought, I made it out to be worse than it was. And this is what happens. So then when I actually went to unload my dishwasher, I set my timer on my stove and, hit start, unloaded the dishwasher, looked at the timer and went, whoa, minute and a half. So this can work both ways. If you choose an activity you really don't like, or the child really doesn't like, they estimate their time to be really long, and then the actual time is really quite fast. It works in their benefit, because they realize, oh, that wasn't that bad. That was really fast. So it's a positive reinforcement. Alternately, you might choose an activity that they love, like, I don't know, playing one game of something, Minecraft or whatever they're playing. They might estimate how long it takes them to do a certain level or a certain whatever they're doing with that game. As you can tell, I don't play video games. And then when they actually do that, they time themselves. And usually what happens is the opposite. They say, it took me 15 minutes. And really, it's 45 minutes later. So you're welcome to create your own or email me for this document, because it really is kind of cool. It's a self-check of, do I have a good grasp on the time it really does take me to do certain tasks? Okay. Kind of transitioning a little bit to a different area here is a discussion about multitasking, because a lot of us feel like we can do several things at once. We're great multitaskers. And what we want to do is not allow our students to fall into this trap, because multitasking is a lie. Our brains are not designed to multitask. Every time you're working on a project and you shift attention to another task at hand, maybe you see something in your web browser and you click over and look at it, it takes approximately 11 minutes to get you back into that focus zone, which is a crazy long time, 11 minutes to get super focused as you were before you got distracted. Our conscious brain does one task at a time. And if you try to multitask too much, it is super toxic to your brain's health. And this is a quote by Sandra Chapman, who is a neuroscientist. Now, multitasking, something that is an unconscious task, is a little bit different. Like, for instance, I know how to fold my laundry without looking or thinking about my laundry, really, and you just kind of fold it without thinking. So I can listen to a podcast while folding laundry. That would be multitasking, but one activity is conscious. I'm thinking about the podcast and information coming in. The other one is not really conscious. It's a subconscious task. So just, if kids are trying to do 2, 3, 4 different things at a time, and all of it does require the conscious brain, conscious effort, try to reel them in and teach them that we really can't multitask. And the more you try to do it, the longer your assignments are going to take. That's been proven in science and in research. And the poorer the quality they're going to be, because you're constantly going to have this battle of trying to refocus yourself. You pull away and refocus and pull away and refocus. So multitasking is not in your favor, nor is it when you're walking and texting on your cell phone. I saw this sign and I thought, well, that would be appropriate for this presentation. Okay, we're coming into the end here. Here's another tool to help kids with executive functioning skills. Teach them how to see their assignments, by giving them what they need to really be able to visualize the end product. This is a great example, actually, and this this one came in at a personal level. This assignment was one of my daughter's assignments way back when they were in middle school, and she came home with this assignment. She laid it down on the dining room table, and she's frantic, and Mom, I've got to write a report, and here's the directions. And we sat down, and I started looking at this, and I'm going, oh, wow. She's got to write a report, a research a science career, write a complete report on it, and include all of these bullet pointed parts in that report. Okay, and so we're talking 7th grade, so someone that just came out of elementary at 6th grade, just went into the middle school at 7th grade, and this is all the direction she got. Just one little paragraph. It's this little circled paragraph here. So not only that, we've got 4 options for a level 1 project, 4 or 5 options for a level 2 project, and then all of this background and directions, which I'm sure was discussed in class, to navigate through. But, you talk about working with students who have trouble with executive functions and trouble just intaking all of the information that's constantly being thrown at them through speech and through language. And oftentimes research shows teachers only pause for 3 to 5 seconds after asking a question. See, when I paused there, didn't it seem like a long time? I'm kind of motoring through this presentation, and I hope you're able to keep up with it. But our students with executive functioning issues, they do need more processing time. So no matter what kind of class you're teaching, I would encourage you to build in processing time, just pauses here and there, and checkpoints here and there. And that's how this presentation was built. You know how I've had the slide that says, let's pause, let's reflect. What did you learn? Answer the question. You know, that's so important to do for our students too, just to get them, give them quiet processing time for their minds to think. So, you know, oftentimes kids are going to need things really broken down for them. So you give an assignment like this, and you know, we sat at home and we went, all right, well, let's see what we need to do. And it took you know, a graphic organizer to map out the process. And then, you know, we had to talk about the writing process, you know, your pre-writing, your rough draft, your revising, editing, your final draft. You know, we had to talk about just the structures of the paper, the structure of each paragraph. You know, you should start with a topic sentence. If you give a reason, a detail, or fact, you should explain that reason, detail, or fact. There's so much that goes into writing a research paper like this that oftentimes our kids are lost. They're lost before they even start, and they don't even get a chance. So show an example of a completed project, and you know, really you take those kids that are confused and take a small group to really help them break down each of the requirements and what's necessary for the project. And you can see I'm a bullet point person. I think in words. I'm not a real visual person, but our students might want to doodle out, you know, the different pieces of the report project that they need to complete. Another strategy for some of these bigger projects, just the tools in the corner, it's another takeaway, is backwards planning. So this is a form that I like to use. If you have a research paper due in 2 months and it's assigned now, what you can do is start at the end date. You might do this all the time already, but you've got this asterisk here, and they're going to doodle a picture of them turning in their paper, right? Not shoving it in their backpack, you know, not sticking it in their folder, but actually turning it into where it needs to go, whether that is in an inbox in their classroom or hitting a submit button through email if it's an electronic paper. And then what you're going to do is you're going to work backwards. Well, right before you turn in that paper, what would you have done the night before? You know, what would you do the night before that? And so you're working through to the very beginning where the assignment is first assigned. And this takes a lot of metacognition and a lot of clarity of concept. You know, for a student to be able to work through the whole process, beginning to end and end to beginning, is critical to their success in turning in large projects. And once you have this plan, it has to stay in their field of vision and on their radar, because if this gets stuck in a folder, put in their backpack, and they never look at it again, well, then that defeats the purpose. Keeping that inside is very important, but also defining your space, the space you have in your time. So this is another tool, and this is kind of rapid fire, and I hope this isn't going too fast. But if you can take a day planner, or like I just printed this off online, and it has the hours of the day for the whole week. So I chose to do the 5 Monday through Friday, from like 7 a.m. to, you know, the nighttime hours. And this is a great practice to do with your child or with your students, but you're going to block out what you're doing during your time. And this is how you start to make time more visible for kids. And oftentimes what happens is students will say, oh, I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm running out of time. one of two things will happen. Oftentimes they map out their day and they realize, wow, I do have some time. Look at that. I've got this big block of open time between 7 o'clock and 8:30. And then I still have some time to transition from, my bedtime routine and get ready to go to sleep at nighttime. The other thing that can happen is that they plot out their day and their week and they look at it and they go, yeesh, I really don't have time. How can I prioritize differently? What can I take off my plate? What am I doing too much of? And that might be the case with some of us adults too, if we're involved in a lot of different organizations and have families and work and all these different responsibilities. When you start to map out your time and you go, wow, I'm not even eating lunch, I'm just eating lunch on the fly. Well, it's kind of a red flag that, if you can see it that concretely and you're not giving yourself any wiggle room, maybe some things need to be shaved down and you need to give yourself some space in your time. A good way to keep this plan right in eyesight vision is just to stick it on a clipboard. It's not recommended to go digital because what happens when your phone turns off? Well, there's my cute little puppy. That's Fisher. But when your phone turns off, you don't see your plan anymore. It's just blackness. And you actually have to physically open up the phone, open up the app, zoom in. And it's, there's a roadblock to getting to it quick enough. If you keep your plan on your clipboard, keep it in plain sight throughout the day, and start working on some strategies to remind yourself to always check your plan, some metacognition, maybe set some alarms. Every hour, I'm gonna check my plan, make sure I'm on track. It will really start to help. Okay, so goals 3 and 4, we've answered. Name 11 executive functioning skills and name 10 tools that could be taught or used, immediately after this seminar here. And you can pause your video if you'd like to really think that through. See if you can remember all 10. See how many of the 11 skills you can remember. Can you remember what they all are? Okay, so to wrap things up, really, we're coming in the end here, and I'm happy this is online actually because this went quite a bit longer than I anticipated, but don't get caught in a time warp. There are 4 truths about time, and you can teach these explicitly because number 1, time doesn't stretch. It's finite. You can't take your 5 minutes and make it 7 minutes. This happens a lot in the mornings. You're got the morning routine, you're trying to get your kids out the door for the bus, and you're going, the bus doesn't wait. I mean, maybe some buses do wait, but maybe the better term is the bell doesn't wait. Whether you're in your seat at school or not, does not matter. That bell is going to ring right when school starts. You cannot stretch out your time to take more time to do things that you should have had done already in order to get your day going. Secondly, time does take up space. You can't see time, but you can make it visible if you use some of these tools, specifically the calendars and the planners that I was showing you. Thirdly, time will get away from you if you're not deliberate. You have to keep your daily plan visible in front of you, and you've got to continually find ways to self-check, to start using some metacognition to go, am I doing what I should be doing? Should I keep working on this task or should I move on to my next task? And then fourthly, your life is really the equivalent of how you spend your time. So when you look back at your calendars and your schedules and you look at what you've done with the time in your days, it is going to equal your life. I will share with you, I do offer executive functioning skills training, professional development to teachers, but I also offer, small group training to students through my reading center. And so this is one of my students, and we're working through a time management curriculum here. Here are some resources I wanted to share with you. Brainology has got some really great information. Dawson and Guar, I think I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. If you Google them up, they've got some books published, but they also have just excellent resources online. You can take a look at these, and honestly, if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to reach out. I thank you for all attending this session, and I do hope that it helps you in life and in teaching. And I think all of us can learn a little something about executive functioning skills, no matter where we are, how strong we are in them. And hopefully you had some takeaways here that you found interesting and helpful. Thank you so much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Take care, everyone.